Let's recap the breaking news at this hour. After a march of between 10,000 and 20,000 protesters at Occupy Wall Street in New York went over without any apparent hitch, violence, or police involvement. Many of these protesters, at the end of the march back at the headquarters Zuccotti Park, decided to try to actually occupy Wall Street, to go on to Wall Street, and this would have been after the trading day was long over and most of the activity of downtown Manhattan had quieted to its early evening levels. At that point, according to many witnesses, reporters ranging from reporters from the New York Daily News to Ryan Devereaux of Democracy Now! To others, at that point, at least 20 of the protesters were arrested as police decided to keep the protesters off Wall Street. Many others were kettled. There were reports of pepper spraying being used again, which of course was the fulcrum point at which these minor protests, Occupy Wall Street, graduated into something entirely different nearly 2 weeks ago when the video became public of 4 young women trapped behind plastic kettling netting, were unable to move and were sprayed by a police officer named Tony Bologna. The mounted police officers apparently walked into the scene, and we had last report of many protesters behind that plastic netting with their arms raised in what was described by one reporter as jazz hands, that being used somewhat sarcastically, I would imagine. The fulcrum point of all this, to use that word twice in one paragraph, was the intersection of Wall Street and Broadway, where we find J.A. Meyerson of alternate.org, an eyewitness to all this. Thanks for checking in with us, J.A. Give me, correct whatever mistakes I've just made in describing what happened.
You described it essentially correctly. We were at Liberty Plaza Park, and the mood was ecstatic and elated. The park was completely full. There is no way of fitting the 20,000 people from the march into Zuccotti Park. Everyone was cheerful, and a group decided that they would go march on Wall Street itself, which of course is prohibited and has always been prohibited to us. Estimates I've heard range from 1,000 to 3,000 people. Pretty quickly, we started hearing back that people had been arrested, reports of beating and of pepper spray, people coming back with footage that's being uploaded right now to OccupyWallStreet.com. A group attempted to go to Wall Street with cameras to film any of the action and were stopped on Cedar, a block up on Broadway, prohibited from going farther south and even prohibited from crossing the street. Occasionally, some of the protesters made moves to defy the blockade and occasionally knocked over barricades. Some were arrested there, but it was very, very difficult for anyone to get down to Wall Street. I've been walking around different blocks, and here I am at Broadway and Wall Street, where there's an enormous police presence, people behind barricades, and it's very difficult to get a sense of what's going on here. It's very, very difficult to get a sense of how many people have been arrested or what tactics were used to arrest them.
Yeah, what we're seeing now, as you're describing for us, is the live stream from the site you just mentioned, the OccupyWallStreet.org, where certainly the tone of things seems to have settled down. But just looking at this anecdotally, it looks like there are more policemen involved at this scene, and I can't pick out the corner at the distance that I'm looking at the video from. But is it possible that there are as many police were involved in this altercation at Broadway and Wall as there were protesters?
Oh, that's definitely possible. What we saw a block up before I was able to get down to Wall Street were buses and many, many, many cars and police bikes driving down Broadway, incurring boos from the protesters barricaded behind the steel grates. I'm now seeing people being extracted from Wall Street in handcuffs by police, being put into police vans and police cars. I'm noticing some news vans outside on Wall Street or on Broadway and Rector, protesters being loaded into paddy wagons right now.
We had a number originally from Ryan Devereaux that he had been able to see just from where he was standing at that intersection, at least 20 arrests. Would you suggest that that's anywhere near a final number, or could it be far higher than that?
I'm sure it's much higher than that. That as these things always go, the early numbers are considerably lower than the final estimates.
The premise that things had gone fairly well and that the interaction between the police and the protesters during the march itself seems to have been verified. This all started when the crowd was essentially too big to get back into Zuccotti Park, and some people decided to make a further effort and actually try to go onto Wall Street. Is that essentially the summarizing of it?
It's definitely true that things went well the entire day. It was peaceful and exciting. I would contest the description that things went awry later, or that people went to Wall Street simply because there was not enough room.
Okay.
People went to Wall Street in order specifically to engage in civil disobedience and in order to draw attention to the nefariousness that comes out of that street, and were arrested knowing full well that that was the danger that they were running, and this was a stand that they were taking. I'm not sure that they would agree with you that this was an undesirable outcome, but that sort of remains to be seen. Certainly the police brutality that we've seen footage of and heard reports of, that's something that no one wants to see. But I know that many of the people were fully aware of the possibility that they would be arrested and willing to incur arrest.
All right. Now, obviously, so much of information at this point is anecdotal, secondhand, and may turn out to be inaccurate later. But just to run a few of the things that have appeared on the People's Network, if you will, as an acronym or as a euphemism for Twitter. If you've heard any of these things, just tell me one way or the other. There is a report that the New York Police Department arrested a New York Times reporter during the last 2 hours. There's another report that a 12-year-old girl was arrested tonight as part of all this. Do you have any way of do either of those stories sound familiar to you?
They certainly sound familiar to me because they happened on the Brooklyn Bridge last week.
Okay.
I haven't heard that was true of tonight in either case.
All right, that may be a repeat of that. That's why we're asking for the specific details. What's happened back at Zuccotti Park? Do you have any idea? Because there's always been speculation that at some point, with the resources available to it, the city of New York would step on this protest and clear out Zuccotti Park by hook or by crook.
The huge number of protesters that assembled in Zuccotti Park at the end of the march from Foley Square left a residual group of protesters that's too large to get rid of without considerable force of violence. I think Zuccotti Park is safe. As I left, I saw George Gresham, the president of 1199 SEIU, giving an interview on camera. I think that generally in Zuccotti Park, the mood is still happy. There was music being played over a loudspeaker, which is the first time we've seen that happen. Zuccotti Park, I think, is still going pretty strong. But the I don't know how to say it, the hostility that we're seeing is all on Wall Street and at the cutoff on Broadway at Cedar, where cops are not allowing protesters or any civilians to proceed southward on Broadway.
The live feed that we have been watching, J.A., has been largely a street scene, and I haven't seen mounted officers, but that was one of the original reports from Ryan Devereaux. Did you see officers on horseback?
I didn't, but I heard the same reports from people who weren't Ryan Devereaux, so there's at least multiple sources.
Is there any, you suggested that the outcome was, of the arrests here was not unforeseen. Is there any sense, Elliot Spitzer mentioned this, and we've talked about it previously on the program with other folks, the sense that the biggest favors done to Occupy Wall Street in the last 3 weeks have been done by the overreactions of the New York Police Department. Do you think that is a prevailing sense tonight among the protesters?
I'm not sure if it's a prevailing sense among the protesters. In my estimation, it's absolutely true. I mean, that surely the uptick in media coverage and public sympathy that happened after the footage of Tony Baloney spraying those defenseless girls in the face with horrible toxins, that definitely helped the protest to grow. And as you've seen today, it's now on the order of tens of thousands of people willing to take a Wednesday afternoon and march through the belly of the corporatist beast. After 3 weeks ago, this being just a Google group and about 30 of us emailing one another. So certainly the images of police brutality have amplified the effect of this protest and its public visibility.
Would you use that word brutality? Is that actually within the realm of possibility here? Because brutality implies force that is entirely unjustifiable.
I would use the term police brutality if there are legal definitions that I'm unaware of. Then I sort of want everyone to take it with a grain of salt. But watching all of the footage and watching the police crackdowns that I've seen with my eyes, I have not seen protesters do a single thing to incur the types of violence that was brought down upon them. Smashing their property. There were reports today of police clubbing protesters about the heads with batons on Wall Street. That's brutal, especially when it's being used on protest that is doctrinally nonviolent and has undergone nonviolence training.
We noticed, by the way, as we were speculating about the reports earlier of mounted officers, and a horse in a crowd is an extraordinarily dangerous and potent weapon. There was the camera pushed in for a moment. It was either the world's tallest policeman, he would have had to have been about 13 feet tall, or he was mounted. He was on horseback, so I think we can confirm at least one in those cases. I want to get back to a number that you threw out, that perhaps at that confluence of Wall Street and Broadway, when 1,000 to 3,000, as you said, of the protesters, and that's a rough estimate, I'm not asking you to testify to that number, but roughly that many people may have gone into the area that the police told them not to go into. Do you have any idea, percentage-wise, either how many of them met with arrest or how many of them met with physical resistance from the police?
I have absolutely no idea. The footage that I've seen is a limited number of people being beat up or maced, and you know, if Ryan Devereaux is anything close to right, 20 people out of 1,000 to 3,000 is not significant. But you know, as you know, Keith, the numbers will roll in over the course of the evening, and we'll have a clearer picture of exactly what happened on Wall Street tomorrow morning.
And what happens, do you suppose, to the protest tomorrow morning? Because every time there's been an attempt to even to arrest or to punish 4 or 5 of protesters, let alone what happened at Brooklyn Bridge on Saturday night, the thing has grown exponentially the next day and the next week. What happens henceforth to Occupy Wall Street after tonight's events?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, the occupation of Liberty Plaza Park has grown essentially to capacity, and there's much discussion among the protesters there about what to happen when the numbers overflow. I think that one thing that this will result in is a surge in protest activity in the many, many other cities in the United States and even all around the world that are staging solidarity occupations. I know that there were some arrests in Seattle today, 24 confirmed, and maybe some more. So I suspect that many more people who are sympathetic to this cause and want to liberate democratic politics from the corporate wealth that enslaves it, those folks will turn out in larger numbers all over the country tomorrow.
Jay Meyerson, I begin to think that you're correct, of alternate.org, who's been good enough to give us his eyewitness account from the corner of Wall Street and Broadway, where today's protest march by Occupy Wall Street turned into something quite different this evening. Obviously, our other segments planned for tonight with Jonathan Turley and Worst Persons will have to be postponed till tomorrow night. We're going to take a quick break and then wrap up what's happened at Occupy Wall Street tonight as Countdown continues.